All right, we are recording. I think we're actually on episode 30 tonight. I'm pretty sure this is 30. Can you imagine? This is 30 weeks of this, and we're on page 47. A little more than a page a night, so a page a week. Um, at any rate, we're going to start on page 47, Life is Participation. Um, Someone had said, we go through the first half of these little sections really, really diligently, and then we just read the last two paragraphs really quickly. And she was saying, I feel a little cheated because we're not going through everything. So usually the back end of these are more illustrating and further developing the thoughts that are, introduced in the front end. So if there is something in that back end, if we do read through it rather quickly at the end of the session that you want to discuss more, please just let me know, let everybody know, either in the session or when I ask if there's any unfinished business from last week, then you can bring it up then if there's still some things we need to talk about. If I think that there's something there that really needs to be developed, then I'll bring it up. And but help me with that, and feel free to help direct this thing. This is our time together, so make sure that you don't leave anything on the table, as they say, right? So with that, is there anything from last week? Because we did read those last couple of paragraphs rather quickly last week. Was there anything from those or anything we talked about that you would like to bring up before we dive into new stuff?
I was thinking of an example about collective and individualistic. I remember I was saying this was probably like 40 years ago when I was a young nurse. So there was a Cambodian family and they had a son who was premature and he had some issues with his intestine. And so he is one of like six, seven kids. So it's a big family. He was just born and I remember the mother refused to care for him, refused to take him home, and because he had a colostomy, which is actually you cut into the bowels because his intestines wasn't working. You pull out part of it, and then you have a bag. That's where your feces go because it's an in your face type of thing. Because had he had complication that is like, I don't know, 6 fingers, that's no big deal. And the nurses, we were all horrified. But then, now as a more mature person, and actually the counselor came to talk to us too, saying too that this is a survival family, that is the same in nature, right? You have a litter of, I don't know, lion cubs. The runt is not taken care of, it's left to die. And that's what she was doing. So I mean, in the there's a nice ending to this. One of the nurses actually adopted him, and he's probably now 40 something, doing well. I saw it on Facebook. But yeah, that's a big lesson in our lives. The other thing I wanted to think that I noticed is because Richard Rohr always says things like you get ambushed by God, you're shocked into waking up to consciousness. There's an earthquake, there's a Copernican revolution. They're all very jarring and kind of violent, is what I see the theme. And so I go back to the what was it? A poem I took a class, and it was a poem that my professor read. It was "Batter My Heart, Three-Person God." And so I was young, so I didn't really know what it meant. So I looked it up, and the analysis of it, it's like a battering ram to get to your heart. And the rest of the poem actually is very violent too. It's by John Donne. Is that the perception of most people? To get God to enter us, it has to be a violent shock.
Well, it's not God who's doing the violence. It's we who are doing the violence. You know, I tell people often that, change doesn't hurt, but resistance to change is excruciating. The more we resist, the more it hurts. And the more that we can't imagine what the fullness of this true relationship that we have with God, the more we are just going to be mind blown when and if it does break through. So that's our own resistance. That's our own defense mechanisms that keep this whole thing at bay. And when it does come through, it's almost like a pent-up pressure, that is building, and then it breaks through. If we could allow it, step by step to come through, it may not feel the same. But I will say that anybody who has really experienced what we're talking about with God uses a giant language, uses hyperbole. G.K. Chesterton called God's love the furious love of God. And the quote from the little short story from which that comes is that the main character is walking through and he can't distinguish the fury of God's love from the fires of hell because they are so extreme. Thomas Burton has, he talks about the burnt men, the ones who have been burned by God's love. So a lot of this language has that kind of character to it for someone who has experienced the radical nature of this love. And so it does overwhelm and can overwhelm. Other mystics will use, sensual or even erotic imagery because that's the closest they can come to what it feels like to be connected to God in this way. But it is extreme language because the experience is intense.
But some people experience it gently.
Oh, sure. I'm sure
Yeah.
they do. Yeah.
Mhm.
It depends. Everybody's going to have a different different experience. But I think, like I said, for those who have been resisting longer, it tends to break through like a dam burst, at times. So it's and the lead up can be very uncomfortable. I know it was for me. I kept feeling more and more things falling away that I was clinging to, and I was feeling more and more panicked about it all. And then the breakthrough came, one of the first breakthroughs that was kind of like the release on the other side of that. So yeah, I think everyone's going to have a different kind of experience and different ways of expressing the experience. But if you have based your whole life on a certain worldview, on a basic belief system, and suddenly that is upended, that's an earthquake. That's a hurricane, right? And that's a Copernican revolution. It's hard for us to imagine now what Copernicus was saying and how it affected the people who believed that the earth was the center of the universe to suddenly realize that we weren't. That changes everything about the way you look at life and look at yourself. So that's the experience of it. It really does completely upend everything. So I guess it depends on how attached you are to your old ideas, how difficult and how dramatic it will be for you. All right, anything else? Well, let's dive into page 47. Life is participation. I'll go ahead and read through it, and then we'll come back and do our thing. So he writes in very real ways. Soul, consciousness, time, love, and the Holy Spirit are one and the same. Each of these point to something that is larger than the individual, shared with God, ubiquitous, and even eternal, and then revealed through us. Holiness does not mean people are psychologically or morally perfect, a common confusion, but that they are capable of seeing and enjoying things in a much more whole and compassionate way, even if they sometimes fail at it themselves. One of my favorite Eastern fathers, Simeon the New Theologian, 949 to 1022, I don't know how new that is, but okay. He said, "What I have seen is the totality recapitulated as one, received not in essence, but by participation." Now, he's not saying I am God. No one can or wants to live up to that. He is saying that we objectively participate in the one life of God, panentheism instead of simplistic pantheism. We are much more prepared to understand this in a post-Einstein world, where energy is the one constant, not isolated substance. We don't manufacture our core identity by good behavior, sacraments, or reading the Bible. We merely awaken it by letting loving people rub off on us, eating the Eucharist, enjoying an entirely sacramental universe, and fully recognizing God's image in all creatures without exception. We become what we are willing to see. We become what we are willing to see. Holiness is living in a mirrored and mirroring universe.
That last sentence is really powerful.
Yeah. Anything else jump out at anybody? Any other comments?
We become what we are willing to see. Really just kind of that popped out for me. I'm not quite sure in totality, but it kind of touched something in me.
We'll make sure we talk more about that, even though it's at the very end, right? Oh.
I have
Anything?
another.
Go ahead,
Yeah, I
Amy.
have. Yeah, there's another one. Recognizing God's image in all creatures, which is at the very end too. So I was I'm listening to this podcast this morning on my drive to work, and he mentioned Imago Dei, which is only mentioned once, he said, in the Bible. So it's a Latin word saying image of God. So he says we don't take it literally. It doesn't mean God has 2 feet, bipedal, 2 eyes. I don't know how he explained it because I didn't understand, but it's meaning to what it says here, God's image is in all creatures. Right. It doesn't have to be us as humans. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe you could
we don't
explain
want to
further.
take that, we don't want to take that literally.
Yeah.
That would just be anthropomorphizing God, but yes, we are created in God's image. Everything is created in God's image, to in the broadest sense of that. Anything else? All right, well, let's take a look at this. Let's go back to the top. In very real ways, soul, consciousness, time, love, and the Holy Spirit are one and the same. Each of these point to something that is larger than the individual, shared with God, ubiquitous, even eternal, and then revealed through us. Okay. Anyone want to riddle me that? What is he basically saying? If soul, consciousness, time, love, and spirit are one and the same. Is that resonating in any way with you?
Well, to me, it's just one way of talking about how everything formless is unified, time, such. Dave and you and I had a one-on-one talking about, how this moment is all that's real, the only thing that's real. Well, again, this is the same eternal moment as would have been for the Christ or the Buddha or Krishna, whoever you again want to say. This is the same now eternally.
Mm-hmm.
This is a divine instant. If I can be in a level of consciousness to appreciate it, would be the right word to apply. But
Okay.
truly, everything belongs, to quote Richard Rohr again, and so therefore, everything is divine. This moment is divine. I just may be oblivious to it, and often am, but it's all God. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely is. So when we look at the structure of this book, it's not really tightly connected. I mean, each one of these is its own kind of little vignette, right? And yet they're building on each other, but they're not, completely following. But this one is following right on the previous undergoing God that we read last week. And if you go back to that one, the first line, your life is not about you. You are about life. You are an instance of a universal and even eternal pattern. The one life that many of us call God is living itself in you and through you and as you. And then we're into Ellen's line, this realization is an earthquake in the brain, and so on and so forth. But I think what he's talking about here, this is back to that collectiveness that we were talking about last week. Where in a collective society, the individual only exists to serve the collective. We have an individualistic society where the collective, the society, exists to preserve the rights of the individual. So it's exactly on its head. But ancient civilizations and subsistent civilizations are collective. They need to be. Survival is in the group. And so you will find your truest identity in the collective, in the group, not in yourself. And that's something that we really need to take a look at, because the egoic mind is all about the individual. It's all about itself. It's all about individual survival. The egoic mind, our conscious mind, is what can actually conceive of ourselves as separate from, in competition with. And that is what actually separates us, which is what he said at the end of that section there. I guess it was actually in the middle, top of page 46. You have never been separate from God except in your mind. And so if we're going to really run against that, then all of these things that he's talking about, soul, consciousness, time, love, and spirit, are pointing to something that is larger than the individual. It is shared with God. It's part of that spiritual collective, if you will. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere all the time, right? And it's even eternal, which goes back to Randy's eternal moment, because eternity is not about a lot of time. Eternity is about an eternal now all the time. This moment we're having is the moment we're always having and always will have eternally. So there's not a lot of time. It's just one moment forever, if you want to think of it that way. And then it's revealed through us. So I think this is another further development of this idea that we only really exist in God. We exist in all of this creation, which is of God. And it's in God's image, and it's revealed through God. We're constantly looking to develop ourself, that whole self-development thing. And often we look at spiritual formation, and unfortunately churches have looked at spiritual formation as further self-development. But if we're developing the self, then we're developing the ego, and we're becoming more and more separate. That's why Jesus is so clear. If you want to find your life, you got to lose it. So it's the exact opposite, where we lose ourselves in the collective, lose ourselves in relationship and each other, not try to further distinguish ourselves from it. And so when you think of it, soul, consciousness, time, love, spirit, he says they're all the same because they're pointing to this larger piece that we're all a part of. Going back to what Jesus said, about the next life, that nobody's given in marriage, that everybody's like the angels in heaven. That idea that we won't need a spouse, we won't need a best friend, we won't need an inner circle, because everyone will have that status with us when we're truly part of the collective again. And as we mentioned, that's not particularly attractive to us, sitting here in our egoic minds and our bodies. So, but I guess when we're there, it'll be fine, right? But at any rate, I think he's pointing back to that, and he's connecting those dots, because this life is participation. He's going to make that case, right? The next paragraph, holiness does not mean people are psychologically or morally perfect. Okay, so if a person is holy, that doesn't mean they're perfect, either psychologically or morally. And I think we can probably understand that. But that they are capable of seeing and enjoying things in a much more whole and compassionate way, even if they sometimes fail at it themselves. Now, holiness, the word holiness, we hardly ever get it defined, but what holy really means is to set something aside and dedicate it for a specific purpose. That's what holiness really means. So if you make something holy, even if you're making God's name holy, as the first line of the Lord's Prayer says, what we're doing is we're setting it aside and we're putting it in a special place, and we're dedicating it for a single use. And so that's what holy really means. So holiness doesn't have anything to do with moral perfection. It doesn't have anything to do with spiritual perfection, but it does have to do with carving out a space and being a part of that space that is now dedicated for something specific. And of course, in this case, it's being dedicated for God's presence, dedicated for our presence, meeting God's presence. And so I think that's where he's going. When we're talking about entering that space that we have cleared and created, now we're talking about entering into holiness. When Moses turns off the road to go inspect the burning bush, God says, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. This is ground that has been set aside and dedicated for a specific purpose. So if he's talking about holy people being capable of seeing and enjoying things in this wholeness, in this collective, seeing all these things as being one, rather than all these separate and individual forms and functions. And if we can see it that way, then we can enter into it. He says, even if they sometimes fail at it themselves. So we're not always going to be compassionate, right? We're not always going to be able to see this oneness, and we're going to get stuck in our fears and stuck in our isolation and stuff. But if we're capable of being able to do that, then more and more repeatedly, we can step back into this dedicated space, into this wholeness and holiness. How's that sound? Make a sense? So then he goes into this next, one of my favorite Eastern fathers, Simeon, the new theologian, said, what I have seen is the totality recapitulated as one, received not in essence, but by participation. Wow, that's a lot of syllables thrown at this, right? What in the heck is he talking about? Okay, what I've seen is the totality recapitulated as one. So recapitulated, there's a word we need to make sure we understand. To recapitulate means to summarize something. It means to kind of bring forth the essence of something, to bring something into a new form or a new expression, to restate it. So all of that would be to recapitulate. All right. So if he sees the totality recapitulated as one, then what he's talking about, especially if you put it in context with the previous two paragraphs, he's talking about seeing everything that he sees, the totality of all of nature and all of creation that he's experienced is expressed and reformed as just one thing. It's not all these individual things. He's seeing it now as one thing. Received not in essence, but by participation. So that doesn't mean that he's getting the essence of that oneness, but he's participating in the oneness. And that would be this definition of holiness, as being able to participate in this set-asideness, in this set-aside space. And then his next sentence is, he's not saying, I am God. Okay, if he were to receive this oneness as the essence, then, the essence, he is, one with God's essence, he's God, right? He's not saying that. No one can or wants to live up to that. He's saying that we objectively participate in the one life of God. So once we can see it, now this is going back to the line that struck Tanya. Once we can see it, we can become it, because once we can see it, we can join with it. We can participate in it. But until we can see it, until we can even conceive of this oneness out of all the stuff that we experience on a daily basis, until we can start to see, with that spiritual second sight, that there is a oneness undergirding all of that, we're not going to be able to join into it, because we're always going to be trying to understand it consciously, which is going to separate us from it, rather than letting it, it's kind of that stepping back and pushing off, letting the sight blur so you can see the picture within the picture, all of that, those analogies that we've used in the past, because it's the exact opposite of the way we normally go after things. And so we have to see it before we can become it and then participate in it. And then he makes this parenthetical panentheism instead of simplistic pantheism. So I think we pretty much established that Richard Rohr is a panentheist. In other words, he sees God in all of creation, infused in it, inextricably linked, but not that God is creation, which would be pantheism. In other words, the universe is not God's body, which would be, the pretty much the most blunt way to put pantheism. But pantheism means that God is immanent in it. He is infused in it. Theistically, God would be separate from and communicating and connecting with it. But panentheism means he's infused in it all and infused in us and living through us. And so over and over, he gives us that kind of imagery. So this idea of God and this one life living in us, through us, and as us from the previous little vignette is, I think, restated here pretty well as well. All right, I just did a lot of talking. Is this stirring up anything in you?
It's a complex little chapter. I'll give it that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I hope that we're unpacking it enough for you. Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, to me, to the word recapitulated, to me, capitulate means you give up, you surrender, you capitulate. Right?
Well, to recapitulate means to summarize. You know, it's
Summarize?
what's that? Yeah, to summarize, to restate.
Or restate.
It can mean that, you know, and it also can mean to put something, to establish a new form for something.
Okay.
To establish,
So
to express something in a different way.
Oh, so it's not to re-surrender again. So
no,
that's totally different.
Doesn't have that meaning. No.
Okay.
Y'all are kind of quiet tonight. So either this is total mud or I'm explaining it so well that you have no questions.
It just made me think of one of my favorite Nina quotes, which was God shows up disguised as reality. And that really resonated with me. And I think that's, I guess, the definition of pantheism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not bad. You know? So we're not, a pantheist might worship a tree, let's say, because the tree literally is God. You know, a panentheist will see God through the tree, will recognize the tree as being created in God's image, that the tree reveals something about God, but is not God in that sense. So there is that kind of separation from the two. But what panentheism does, as opposed to theism, is really bring God closer. And if you think about Jesus, God was so immanent for Jesus, you know, just so immediate, just present right there. And I think that's exactly what Rohr is trying to get across, that God is closer to us than our next breath, than our next heartbeat. It's right here, right now, infused in us. And Jesus was always talking about the kingdom being within, in our midst. It's part of us. It's not out there someplace that people, when is the kingdom going to come? When is it? We're still asking the same question 2,000 years later. When is the kingdom going to come? You know, when's the rapture going to come? And Jesus would say, stop looking out there. That's not where it's coming from. You know, the direction of kingdom is from inside to outside, never outside in. And so that would be another kind of example of panentheism, I think. Everything is within. You know, God showing up disguised as reality would be another way of saying the same thing. This reality that we see in all these individual forms is really pointing back to the oneness of God.
And that's a lot easier for me to understand, that quote, William, than the very first line of this paragraph of the top. You know, the soul, consciousness, time, love, and everything, the Holy Spirit, they're all at one. That's almost just too existential. I can't get my arms around that. It's
too esoteric.
Yeah, it's a little too esoteric. It's like, whoo. Okay, okay, I can see God showing up and the people you bump into in life, in reality. Sure, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it has a lot to do with God consciousness, the ability to perceive and process and understand. So again, talking about the formless, that if it's being filtered through my egoic thinking, my personal thinking, my conceptualization of self and the world around me and stuff, which again, it basically separates, divides, judges, all that jazz and stuff. Well, again, that's not really God consciousness. That's Randy consciousness. So it's really starting to finally get some traction where Dave talked about the analogy of talking about like Michelangelo removing all that isn't David. Okay. So now I'm starting to finally get it. It's like, yeah, if I can remove all my conceptualizations that isn't God, then I'm going to see the David that's divine. I'm going to have this kind of, again, and I've had it before. It's just really been, I don't know. Again, I think really circumstantial and is using, again, trying to use Rohr language. It's been on the circumference. I think I think too much.
Yeah.
It's become more of a knowing than a knowledge. Does that make sense? I have a real hard time communicating this stuff, but there's a knowing that really, I don't know, as much as I want to communicate it and stuff, I can't.
Mhm. So here, but here's an important thing, because Randy, you were talking about something that's formless and getting away with all your getting rid of all your conceptions. One of the points I think Rohr is making, and that Jews would make over and over again, is that God is not abstract. God is not, a formless concept. God was imbued in everyday experience. And so it's not just the formless things, it's the things that we see every day are also the image of God. What we want to do is remove any of our pre-existing notions of what those forms mean so that we can just be part of them, purely. Just experience them as they are, like a small child would. Everything is a first experience for the small child, and everything is so exciting because, they don't see themselves as being separated from it. Can we get back to that kind of experience, but bring our full awareness and consciousness to it? But these are very concrete things. We need to really be engaged in life and not trying to stay separate from it. One of the problems with Western spirituality and Western Christianity and Christian spirituality is that we think the more holy we get, the more we have to be removed from the world. We get holier as we remove. And so this whole idea of being an ascetic and denying yourself all the pleasures of life and food and sex and all this stuff in order to become more holy is the exact opposite of what the Jews would say. You're holy when you're diving into and fulfilling yourself as a physical being. That's where you're going to be more connected with God, because God is part of all of this and God sees all the creation as good. And of course we see in the West that this world is in a fallen state because of original sin and so on and so forth. So it's a very different worldviews. So we want to be concrete, but we want to remove all of our biases. Take the filters out, the glasses off, so that we're just present.
So live it up and be present.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, participate, right? Like that's, if you're gonna participate, you have to participate.
Jump in,
You
right.
gotta lean into it.
You got to get your uniform dirty.
You gotta get your hair wet.
You
and
gotta
stuff.
If
get
your
your
uniform's
uniform
clean, then you didn't play the game, like that. We're not supposed to remain innocent, we think somehow we're supposed to retain that innocence or regain that innocence. It's like, no, no, we're supposed to get all dirty and make mistakes and screw up and sin, God forbid, and get all wrinkly and pruny and and your last check is supposed to go to the undertaker and it should bounce.
And your epitaph should say, "I'm exhausted," because you did everything that you could think of to do.
I'm exhausted, but in a good way.
No taking. That's right.
That was good, Kathy.
Oh yeah. Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so he goes on. We are much more prepared to understand this in a post-Einstein world, where energy is the one constant, not isolated substance. Okay, so what's he talking about, this post-Einstein world? All right. Well, probably Einstein's most famous equation, right? At least popularly and culturally, E equals mc squared. Okay, what does that mean? That means energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Now, one of the things that I may want to quibble with a little bit, it's not, I mean, I don't think he meant this, mathematically, but the constant is actually the speed of light. Speed of light is a constant. You know, it's kind of the universal speed limit, you know, and so on and so forth. But and it's at like 186,000 miles per second is the speed of light, speed of light. So that is pretty much a constant throughout the, as far as we can see anywhere in the observable universe, speed of light always travels at the same speed. You know, it can curve and do all these other things through gravity, but that's the constant. So if you want to calculate the energy, you take the mass of anything, you take the mass, you multiply it times the speed of light squared, and that's going to equal the energy. And of course, this is the understanding, the equivalence between energy and mass that allowed nuclear energy to be harvested, right? And resulted in the bomb and of course, everything else that we're doing with nuclear energy. But so he's talking about energy in this way, where energy is the one constant, not isolated substance. But I think what he's talking about here, energy as opposed to mass. So once again, we're getting this heaven and earth. Remember, the Jews saw human beings living between heaven and earth. So if you think of heaven as a place of all oneness and connection, that would be the pure energy part. And then the earth is a place of individual form and function. That would be the mass part. So isolated substance, you know, isolated individual blocks of mass, as opposed to the oneness of the energy that really the mass is equivalent to. So mass is just kind of like frozen energy, if you will. But he's trying to get that analogy going. So this idea of us belonging to this oneness in ways that we can easily miss if we're focused on the mass, focused on the individual form and function. And so he says, now that we have this image from Einstein, and relativity has been, you know, for 100 years now, has been, you know, pretty much, you know, tamped down into our collective consciousness, that maybe this analogy is going to be easier for us to understand. He says we don't manufacture our core identity by good behavior, sacraments, or reading the Bible. And absolutely, if you have created your core identity through any of those means, then it's just an egoic identity. It's what we can think of. It's what we have gotten our hands around and are holding on to and trying to use as a control point. And we said so many times in here, any identity that you can put in words, that you can think with your thoughts or you can express, is not who you really are. Because any of that can be taken from us. And if it can be taken from you, it's not who you are. So we don't manufacture our core identity by good behavior, sacraments, or reading the Bible. We would like to think that we could obey our way into kingdom. We try to do it all the time, but it doesn't work. It's the opposite of that. It's letting go of all of those mental images of identity. It's losing our life that allows us to find it. He says, instead of manufacturing our core identity, we merely awaken it by letting loving people rub off on us, eating the Eucharist, enjoying an entirely sacramental universe, and fully recognizing God's image in all creatures without exception. So instead of leaning forward, once again, as we've said many times in here, and trying to strive to acquire something that we would see as our identity, meaning and purpose, we're going to let it awaken in us because it's already there. That's what Jesus kept saying. You're not going to find kingdom out there as if you don't have it and bring it in or enter it. He said, it's already in you. It just needs to be realized. It needs to be awakened. You need to get everything else out of the way, just like Randy was talking about. Just remove everything that's not the horse. Remove everything that's not David, you know, out of that block, and then that's it. Unfortunately, it's sneakier than that, though, because we can't live our lives by a negative, trying to always purge the things we don't want. What we do is we allow ourselves to see what's already there, and this stuff kind of falls off by attrition. So it's a little bit different than chiseling a block of marble, but the analogy holds to an extent, right? So letting loving people rub off on us, just allowing those relationships to really sink in. And obviously, because of the theme here, to participate in those relationships, to fully participate, to be fully present to them. He talks about eating the Eucharist. that's bringing into ourselves, you know, all of this essence and these choices that we make and the nature of these relationships, letting it literally assimilate into our cells and our DNA, having no space between. I mean, there's really nothing more intimate than eating something, if you think about it, right? When you eat it, there's no defense. If you eat the poison, you're a goner. You know, if you eat something nurturing, okay. But that's kind of the ultimate intimacy, is to bring it into our own body. That's why Jesus uses that image to say, hey, anything short of this is not going to take you where you want to go. You know, you have to literally eat my body and drink my blood. You have to bring in my Dhamma, my essence, my life force, all the provision that I provide. So eating the Eucharist, enjoying an entirely sacramental universe. Does that mean anything to anybody? Enjoying an entirely sacramental universe. Sometimes he uses expressions here that we got to think about. Go ahead, William.
I think aligned with Nina's thought of God shows up as reality, you know, and I think in that same discussion where she shared that, she talked about this idea of what I experience, God experiences. Like what I taste, God tastes. What I enjoy, God enjoys, basically. And having that, you know, I think that's pointing in the same direction you're describing there, where it's like my experience is God's experience. And, you know, holding my experience in, or allowing that thought to shape how I experience, essentially, or how I show up or participate to my experience. Yeah.
I like that.
To me, enjoying entirely sacramental universe, like meaning it's the entire universe. It doesn't have to be that awesome sunset. It's the mundane things that is also sacramental and holy. The mopping the floor, although it's mundane, you can see it as a sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, now see, it came back to my head just now, like what Brother Lawrence had said too, is you wash the pots and pans. That's doing it for God. That's the sacrament of it. It's mundane.
Okay, so we keep using the word sacrament. I think we need to define it. Now, every time we do a sacrament at the effect, I always define it to make sure that we understand. And the way we define it is that a sacrament is an outward expression of an inward transformation. Okay? An outward expression of an inward transformation. A sacrament is a ritual by which we can celebrate this transformation with the rest of the community. It's inward. It's an interior transformation. And so because of that, it's hidden from everyone else. But the sacrament allows us to ritualize it and then share it outwardly. But the ritual means absolutely nothing if the inward transformation hasn't taken place. I don't care how many times you want to get baptized. If you haven't emerged from that cocoon inside, then you're just getting wet. You know, it's same thing with a marriage. No matter how many I do's you say, you know, until you really do I do inside, then there is really no marriage. So if we're going to talk about a sacramental universe, and he talks about enjoying a sacramental universe, and I really like the way you put that, William, talking about our experiences, God experience, God enjoys what we enjoy. I remember someone saying, hey, God has thrown the greatest party that could ever be thrown in this life. And what's our job? Simply to enjoy the party and keep your eyes on the host. I kind of like that. Enjoy the party and keep your eyes on the host. The sacramental universe is this outward expression of God's inward transformation. And we can participate in that, And if you throw a party, what is the greatest pleasure for you when you throw a party? Is to stand back and watch all your guests eating and drinking and laughing and hugging and just having a blast. What is better if you've thrown a party than to see people enjoying your party? If we could enjoy God's party here in this life, then I think what William said is absolutely real. God is enjoying our enjoyment. And when we experience everything through our senses and in our relationships, we just need to participate, you know?
Gives new meaning to eat, pray, love. That's what I thought of when I was listening to some of this. You're eating, you're praying, you're loving, you're just living life.
Mhm.
Kind of.
And we work and we strive and we try to figure these out and we create these huge mountains that we have to scale and things that we have to learn and all this stuff. And, you know, at the end of it all, what does the prophet say in Ecclesiastes? He says, you know, everything that we do is vanity. It's a chasing after the wind. It's meaningless. You know, even the wisdom that I've worked so hard to achieve, that I'm using to express what I'm expressing to you, says the only thing that's left for a person to do is to enjoy their day under the sun, enjoy their work under the sun, and enjoy their food, enjoy their drink, and enjoy their spouses. That's it. You know, when it comes right down to it, what do we really do of any sort of substance? And at the end of his life, that's what he realized. After going through everything that a human being could go through in excess, he comes down to the fact, hey, a wise man and a fool are going to die. A rich man and a poor man are reduced to the same state. The only thing that has any meaning is the way you spend your moments. That's what it comes down to. And God enjoys what we enjoy and is thrilled when we're enjoying the party. Participate. That's it. And then this last line, you know, Tanya's line, we become what we are willing to see. Are we willing to see that? Are we willing to understand how enjoying the ride is really the hallmark of kingdom life? I mean, we would see that as Christians as being somehow selfish, as somehow self-centered. You know, we're not really supposed to enjoy this. We're supposed to just survive it, you know, and do the moral thing, even though we really don't want to, even though it's a big sacrifice, you know, but if we will do it and if we'll suffer long enough, then we're going to get our reward later on in heaven. That is completely antithetical to certainly Hebrew thought, but I really think it's antithetical to everything that Jesus is trying to teach us as well. So you want to talk
Dave,
about an earthquake in the mind, you know, it's going to be turning that around, right? Go ahead, William.
can you go back a little bit before you started reading that last sentence? You said something about the wise man and the rich man and the poor man will come to the same end, and then you said something right after that.
What did I
Something about
say? We're
something
going to have to
about
go back to the playback.
okay,
Well,
never mind.
okay,
I'll
so
go
I
back.
think what I was saying was at the end of his life, this is Solomon traditionally,
Right.
And so he was purportedly the most fabulously wealthy king in the East. And so he had amassed all of this wealth. He had done all these building projects. He had over 1,000 wives and concubines. I mean, he had everything. And then finally he asked God for wisdom and he got that too. And so he was celebrated as the wisest man on earth. But at the end of his life, when he is looking at his own mortality, he's looking at death and he looks around and he says, hey, you know, I've amassed all of this. I've done all this and I'm going to die like the fool and the poor man. It made absolutely no difference. And so when it comes right down to it, the only thing that we can do in life is enjoy the span of time of each day. Enjoy your food, enjoy your drink, enjoy a day's sweaty work under the sun. Enjoy that. Enjoy the wife of your youth, I think is the way that it's put in the book. But enjoy your spouse, enjoy your family, because that's all that is of any real substance in the final analysis. And then God participates in our participation in the party. Is that close enough, William? Okay. You know, when you first read Ecclesiastes, it's just sounds so morose, so melancholy, so defeatist, just the darkest book in the Bible. Why is this even included here? But when you start to see it from a second half of life perspective, it just jumps out at you with brilliance. I'm sorry, William, I cut you off.
I was thinking about something you'd said a couple of months ago about the idea that gratitude can be a form of prayer. like gratitude can be like just like a wordless prayer, if you will. And I think that's what the participation would look like if you know, leaned all the way into it, basically.
I think gratitude is what it feels like to be in kingdom. Gratitude is what it feels like to be fully present to God's presence. I mean, when you are grateful, right? It's that your defenses are down. You're usually grateful because you've been given a gift that you could never give yourself. And so you are tacitly embracing your own dependence and your vulnerability, that someone had to give you something that you could never give yourself. But when that wall goes down, the feeling of gratitude, I think, is what we feel. It is the feeling, or maybe the proof that we've entered that state of being. Gratitude is it. That's the feeling of it all. That pleasurable feeling. And then holiness is living in a mirrored and mirroring universe. That's Scott's line, you know. So as he's defining holiness, this ability to see and participate in, how did he put it again? Holiness does not mean people are psychologically or morally perfect, but that they are capable of seeing and enjoying things in a much more whole and compassionate way. So holiness, this ability to see and enjoy things in their wholeness, to see the totality recapitulated as the one, right? See the oneness in everything, and to be able to see that and enjoy that is living in a mirrored and mirroring universe, going back to that everything is created in God's image. Everything is revealing God's nature. And when we're lost in that, when we are truly participating, whether it's in a group of people, whether it's just in nature. I mean, how many times have I heard surfers saying when they're bobbing on their board out there in those rhythms, that everything just goes away and they're just one with that motion. They're one with that water that's connected. I mean, the water is all, the oceans are all one, right? They're all connected, and you're part of that larger than you entering back into the collective, and that expansiveness where your small boundaries fall away and you're suddenly part of this vast thing. That's what we're talking about here. And that can be achieved as a surfer. It can be achieved in relationships. It can be achieved in contemplative prayer. I mean, we can get there all sorts of ways if we're willing to really participate. Yeah, that's it. Any other closing lines for us tonight?
I would just say that definition of holiness is a good one, because when you walk up to somebody on the street and ask them, what does it mean to be holy? That's not what I would ever expect to hear. That's very Rohr, so I like it.
Yeah, what's the usual definition of holiness? Being good, being moral, being
Yeah,
religiously compliant. I mean,
yeah,
that's what we usually, being pious, you know,
right,
that's what
tied
we
to that.
usually think of holiness, and that is just so wrong. For lack of a better term. You know, it just really misses the point of what holiness is. But you know, we can keep this, but for all of the complexity that Tanya was talking about in this little page, really it just boils down to, are you willing to enjoy the ride? Can you enjoy the ride? Can you see past all of the difficulties and all of the complexity and all of the concerns that you have, and just be able to enjoy the ride, even just for a moment? You know, if you can't do that, and there are so many people who can't, I mean, they are just such balls of confusion. They are so tense. They're so stressed. They cannot see past their fears, and they can never let go of their mind constantly churning and worrying and thinking forward like a chess player. And so they never really get to enjoy even a moment's peace. Uh, so it's that ability to go against that programming and just participate and just be. That's what we're talking about here. And yes, Ellen, it goes back to Brother Lawrence, and he's a perfect example of all this. You know, but all of the mystics are basically telling us the same thing. And Jesus was a mystic. He's telling us the same thing too. All righty then. Bill, did you ever show up? Bill Fellers, are you there? I don't know if we ever actually got Bill.
I'm
Here
here.
he is.
Oh, there he is. Is Gail there too, buddy?
Nope.
Okay. Glad you were here with us, even though we didn't
Me
get to
too.
see your smiling
Me
face
too. Hi, everybody.
or your lovely background. Okay, we'll leave it there for now, and then we'll come back with another one. And I hope we did this one more justice, got through everything with a little bit more meat and potatoes. So, Scotty, where are you? There you are.
I'm here. And God, I'm grateful that I'm here and we're all here. And we just want to stay in that present moment, that moment of connection, that moment that fills every space with your essence. Let us have the spiritual maturity to tune into that space and stay focused on listening to your guidance and your direction and your offer to be connected in a deeper, more intimate way. We're so grateful that you're interested in us, that we mean something to you. It gives us a sense of security. And you certainly offer up enough assurance that we're going to be okay. That I just want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you for loving us and caring about us and looking out for us. Thank you for the love you put in our heart for you, and more love than we know what to do with. And so we pour it out on our friends and family and each other. It's good. It's a very good one. And we're grateful. And we pray this and we thank you. We do it all in your holy, precious, mighty name, Lord Jesus. Thank you for showing us the way and the truth and helping us to build a strong connection. We love you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone. Another good conversation. All right, we'll see you Sunday.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, all.
Good
Bye,
night.
Kathy.
Good night, good night, good night. Good night, Sandy. Scott, Jordana, Tony. All
See
right.
you on Sunday.
I'll see you on Sunday, dear. Bye-bye.
Bye.